Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome all of you to this panel discussion. I'm overwhelmed by the presence of large number of students, scholars, researchers, and faculty members here. Uh, this panel discussion is illuminated by the best and the finest of the academic world, research community, practitioners, policymakers, and leaders. We have a small program, although of course, but it is going to be highly rich in quality and in depth. And the title of today's panel discussion is Europe and India Security Calculus. On behalf of Center for European Studies, I welcome Professor Hans-Gert Pöttering, Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, Mr. Klaus Welle, who has joined us online because of some issues related to visa. Just now, President told me, and Professor Harshvi Pant, Dr. Adrian Hack, Professor Bhashwati Sarkar, Dean Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, and members of the delegation from CAS, faculty members, and scholars. First of all, I miss our Vice Chancellor here, but she has sent a message to me saying that, Sheetal, you can read it on my behalf to the gathering, sir. And she says that, dear dignitaries on the dais, on behalf of the Jawaharlal Nehru University, I welcome Professor Hans Pöttering, Mr. Klaus Welle, Mr. Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, and Professor Harshvi Pant from Observer Research Foundation. I could not join the event due to pressing administrative responsibilities, but I am impressed by the program outline. How and why Europe is relevant in India's security calculus is the theme of the discussion today. I am sure that this panel discussion will generate interest among students in understanding global politics, security, international relations, and India-EU relations. India and Europe are functioning and vibrant democracies. They have a lot of convergences in terms of values and operating structures. There is a lot of potential for both to explore and work together to bring peace and prosperity. I hope you will have better insights after listening to the experts. I'm informed that a large number of students from colleges all over India have joined us online. Their participation is a testimony to the gravitational pull that JNU has. I welcome all the participants, faculty, and students who have joined us online. I welcome you once again and wish you success and hope that we will meet on some other occasion. This is the message given by the Vice Chancellor, and I have read it in her absentia. Now I'm happy to share that we are joined by almost 700 plus audience online. And these are the people, those who have joined us from 4 colleges particularly, and we are also live streaming this event on the YouTube. I welcome St. Xavier's College, Head of the Department, Professor B.K. Sinha, and the Program Coordinator, Dr. Shreya. I welcome Dr. Rajiv Ranjan Sinha from Shahid Bhagat Singh College and Dr. Ratyusha as Program Coordinator in the college. I welcome a team from ARSD College, Dr. Premchand and Dr. Amit Singh, who is present here, and all the students, those who have joined us physically. And I also welcome Dr. Aditya Narayan Mishra from Satyavati College and Dr. Stephen Rain, who is the program coordinator there. There is a lot to speak on Europe and India's security calculus, but today is the day for the experts. And I hand over the mic to Professor Bhashwati Sarkar, Chair of the Center for the European Studies. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sheetal. On behalf of the Center for European Studies, I join my colleague to welcome all the dignitaries who have joined for this panel discussion. It's a very, very distinguished panel that we have here today. We are extremely happy that you have come here to the university and share your rich experience about this topic that we are going to discuss with our students. And as you understand that we are joined by so many other young scholars and young students from across Delhi and across India. So this is something which is very important for us and the Center for European Studies, that we have not just organized a program at the center for the center students, but have outreach to other areas of India and scholars who are also looking at Europe very intently. So that's something which is very important for us. About the topic, okay, this is something which we keep doing. So about this topic which we are to discuss, we have a very distinguished panel. And nevertheless, just to start with a few observations. when we talk about India and Europe, what we see is India and Europe engaging very intensely over the last few years, I would say. And our strategic partnership starts way back in 2004. And since then, what we have seen is there's an emerging cooperation on the important pillars of defense and security. But I think as the vibrancy that we see in India and Europe's relation is also related to the India-EU relation that has become very important since 15th India-EU summit, which was in 2020, which brought out the roadmap 2025. So that there are, when we're looking at Europe, we have to understand that when we're looking at India's relation with Europe, we can look at it at three levels, I could say. One is, as I said, at the level of the European Union, but we also have very robust bilateral relations with individual states, strategic partnership with France, Germany, UK. We have a strategic partnership, the very recent one with Greece. So these are bilateral ties which are very strong. We also have the EU level, and also one could say that at the regional level in terms of the two Nordic summits that we have. So there are different ways and patterns in which we are engaging with Europe. And so this intensity, as I said, is particularly visible since the roadmap 2025, which clearly lays out that India and EU will strengthen and expand India-EU dialogue mechanisms on foreign policy and security issues of common interest. This is something which was clearly laid out and which also talked about military to military relations, exchanges, maritime security, cyber security, counter-terrorism. These are all very, very well-established dialogues which are there, which are functioning. Apart from that, I think other than this, 2020, what we have seen, the following, meetings that we had, which was in 2021, which is a one-off kind when India-EU leaders meeting, the first ever India-EU leaders meeting, which was in 2021, where the Prime Minister met 27 EU member states and leaders of those states and the President of the European Council and the President of the European Commission. So this was a kind of a one-off, a very different kind of a format, which also shows the intensity and also shows the kind of engagement that both sides are interested in. This was also followed by the visit of the President of the European Commission to India in 2022. And this is again, which was important because at that point we had decided to have the India-EU Trade and Technology Council in place. So there are a number of things which are happening so far as our relation is concerned. And when we look at the security scenario, of course, our security concerns are very different. We have China next to us, so our brush with China is quite different, qualitatively quite different from what it is with so far as Europe is concerned, because Europe also and European Union per se has also, kind of shifted its stance so far as China is concerned, as we know very well in terms of how it is looking at it as apart from cooperation, competition as a systemic rival. So there are issues there, but our issue with China would be quite different. And this again brings us very quickly back to the kind of recent developments where we have seen the Ukraine war and India's different stance on the Ukraine war. That's something which again stood out quite distinctly, which in a sense kind of pointed out that what are India's security concerns, given the fact that one, that there is a problem that we have at our borders, and the kind of military capabilities that we have, which are very highly dependent on our very deep ties with Russia, which we have. So how do we then kind of disengage with that? Because that is also something which we would like to do. So there are a number of things which are happening in terms of these developments in the security scenario that we see. One interesting thing which I thought which came up very recently, which the EU's new ambassador to India, who talked about in a recent interview about how the European Union itself has changed in terms of how it understands itself as an actor. And what he said was that it is no longer an economic power, just an economic power. And he says that people may have realized it is also in the way we reacted to Russia's war on Ukraine. We have mobilized a significant amount of money to maintain the supply chain of weapons to Ukraine. We have changed a lot of global lot as a global security actor. So the EU projecting itself as a global security actor. And another area where India and Europe is looking together is the Indo-Pacific, with a number of documents which have come up from Europe in terms of the ones with Germany, Netherlands, and the UK, and also the EU itself. So these documents, which basically highlight the importance of maintaining the rule-based international world order. And in that context, what Ambassador was saying also was how what European Union is doing is having the coordinated maritime presences in the Indo-Pacific, and this is something where India is also important as in terms of its security outlook. So there are a number of things which are happening in terms of India and EU's engagement, and the security aspect of that engagement is also increasing apart from the other areas that we focus on. With these words, I will stop because I know there's an excellent panel here to discuss all of this in great detail. Over to you, Srikanth.
Thank you so much, Professor Sarkar, for giving those opening remarks. Now, I would request Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, Dean of School of International Studies, to kindly take over and chair the session, sir, please. Just a brief introduction. Professor Kondapalli is Dean of School of International Studies, JNU. He has an extensive academic career for more than 3 decades with expertise in teaching, writing, and research in modern Chinese history, with a notable recognition at national and international level, sir. Over to you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Sheetal Sharma, my colleagues, students, researchers, Ambassador Puri, Dr. Pöttering, Professor Pant, and Adrian Hack, Professor Welle from virtually in the cyber domain. Since the 2008 strategic partnership that we have between EU and India, and with the shared values and concerns, the India has been configuring Europe in its security calculus. As has been rightly mentioned by Professor Baswati, the bouquet of these have been expanding, the items have been expanding. Areas of cooperation have also been expanding substantially, creating new dynamics. For example, the Professor Baswati mentioned about the cybersecurity domain, which is a very crucial aspect in the recent times as we continue with our ICT obsession and expanding in the cyber domain. These challenges have increased substantially. But from an Indian national security point of view, cross-border terrorism is mentioned as the #1 security challenge for India. And in this light, we also have Europe recognizing terrorism as a major challenge, given the incidents that Europe faced in the recent times, and also the kind of cooperation we have seen in the 1267 Committee of the United Nations Security Council on counterterrorism, both in terms of illegal financing, hawala transactions, and other training, travel, funding, so on and so forth of the terrorist groups. This has become a major item in the EU-India relations and in terms of our security cooperation. But we also have diversified into various areas. Maritime dialogue we have been conducting for a long time now. And the Indo-Pacific that has come about since 2017, we have a lot of cooperation on those 6 items that are mentioned in the Indo-Pacific idea, that is in terms of free and open Indo-Pacific, rule of law, meaning thereby the UNCLOS provisions, which again originated in Europe in the cannon fire rule and other aspects in the 16th century. We also have cooperation related to illegal fishing, piracy. We just had the EU NAV force in Djibouti and other areas involved in the ITF, International Task Force, in the Indian Ocean region. And as a result, today, according to the International Maritime Organization, the number of piracy incidents have decreased in Indian Ocean, but increased in South China Sea and Southeast Asian waters. We have a lot of cooperation in this regard, and as you may have seen, the last year's Quad meeting mentioned about the countering of illegal fishing and so on. And in the background of various European countries showing interest in the IP Indo-Pacific, various countries have mentioned about this: Germany, France, UK, and so on. And EU itself has taken some position on the Indo-Pacific. In the light of those, we see the diversification of dialogue process and cooperation. Also in other non-traditional security challenges like migration, like environmental issues, climate change, and so on, and on energy, new renewable forms of energy in the light of the climate change related issues, but also on health related matters. We have a substantial cooperation during the COVID pandemic and other health related issues. So in the light of all of these, the today's meeting is very significant, and let me congratulate the organizers, Center for European Studies. The center has been organizing various meetings so far. Jean Monnet module has created a base for such cooperation, and we have seen at least 3 this year, right? Such meetings. This is the 4th. And I wish the center and its activities on bringing together new talent and ideas. Let me congratulate the center on this. Thank you. Let me move on then to, as the program schedule has mentioned, Ambassador Puri, would you like to make welcome?
Kondapalli, thank you very much.
May I introduce Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri to the gathering? Our very own Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri joined Indian Foreign Services in 1982 and has served as Ambassador of India to European Union, Belgium, Luxembourg, Nepal, and as Deputy Permanent Representative of India to the UN. Among others, he led the Indian delegation for the first meeting of the Global Forum on Migration and Development in Brussels in July 2007, and the presentation of various reports by India at the Human Rights Council. Sir, over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Professor Srikanth, thank you very much. Professor Kondapalli, Professor Srikanth. Your Excellency, what a pleasure. For someone associated with this center, I want to tell you, nothing could give us greater honor, not just pleasure, but to have a former president of the European Parliament. And most people here are gathered to hear you. Me is relatively common. But I will pose a few questions. Sheetal has introduced me to you, but sir, I have an old German connection. I'm perhaps the only chap, when I used to joke with German diplomats, I have 2 kids born in Berlin, which is better than almost any German diplomat. But that's okay. Excellency, I was ambassador to the European Union when Klaus was the Secretary General, and I was very much hoping to see him here. But obviously, I was there after you had left. My questions are about 2 or 3 things I want to hear you about. One, I want to thank this center for not using one other word which has become very fashionable in India since the last 2 years, which is called Pacific. I am very delighted that the focus of this is India. Sir, Germany and India have some of the finest and largest of relationships. I know Indo-Pacific is important, but if India is a little bit more important, Indo-Pacific will find it. So I'm very glad. I want to thank you. But Your Excellency, I want to ask you a few questions because I want to tell you a bit about myself. I was in Germany. My first stint there in Bonn, not Berlin. I belong to that era when we bought HDW submarines. My next major set of interactions was when we jointly served on the Security Council and jointly abstained on Resolution 1973 on Libya in March of 2011, something that caused a great deal of consternation in the German political and foreign policy setup, But I can share this with you, sir, that the then foreign minister of Germany, Welle, told me personally, this is what the German constitution says. We are not having boots on the ground. German boots on the ground anywhere in the world. He's no more. You'll have to take my word for what he said. But I have noticed the change in the context of Ukraine. So my first set of questions is, your country, sir, and we'll talk about the EU in a minute, your country, because whether we like it or not, and no matter the fact that Britain is no longer there, therefore the power of the two propellers, France and Germany, becomes that much greater in relative terms. Whether your country is in a sense coming out of what one could say a bit of pacifism, a degree of neutrality, etc., in terms of, let me say, not involvement in war, but in terms of the war-making machine. And Your Excellency, I want to steer clear of these other ideas, energy security, climate security, food security, because there are endless number of securities around. But let's focus ourselves on this hardcore military aspect, because we then obfuscate matters by talking about all sorts of other. I must also mention that when I started my career, Germany was India's largest economic partner, the largest investor and the largest trading partner for this country. You still remain at the very top of things, but I'm afraid for a variety of reasons, things have moved on. So this is my first question. Is there a change in Germany? Because if there is a change in Germany, then I think a certain amount of change in EU would be possible, no matter what the ambassador says, that they are a security player, yes, in that broader sense of the term. But the EU's actual abilities in military terms have been down to some NAV4 exercises and that. In India, very often we conflate Europe in terms of military action with France. And the reasons are very simple. So we bought the Rafale aircraft, we're only among 3 countries in the world we bought them. Before that we bought the Mirages. There is, let me say, a public hype to it. And of course, the fact of there being a P5 member and so on and so forth. So there are these. But for me, the important thing is Germany. Very much. This is perhaps the most important set of questions that I'd like. And secondly, I want to see and hear from you, what is it that your country, and by extension, it will invariably be the European Union. Look at India. We are right now the 5th largest economy in the world. For those of you who don't know, there is only one European country which is ahead of us in terms of GDP, and that is Germany. But both Germany and Japan at about 4 trillion in the next 5-7 years, because of demography, will be overtaken. We are therefore market. We're therefore a huge technology supplier. We are also with you on all this G4 and all these particular things. How do you see your country? And I'm very clear, by extension, it will be the European. How do you see your country perceiving my country, India, in terms of stepping up the interactions across the board? And we can then look at, economic security, bettering the economic framework, sustainability, climate security, energy. We can add all of it. So, Your Excellency, there are many, many other things I could ask you. But as I said, people want to hear you. Not for me, it was to pose questions. I have my views. But I am very, very pleased, very honored to have someone like you who has occupied the highest places. I think all of you should know that the way the European Union functions, particularly post Lisbon Treaty, you have actually 2 heads at the top, the President of the Council and the President of the European Commission. But people forget that the European Parliament is an equal partner. So, Your Excellency, I must point out to you that in 2016, when we had the summit in Brussels, and even though the presidency of the Parliament is not part of the equation, as far as I was concerned as the ambassador, it was a no-go situation. If we did not have your successor, who was then the President of the European Parliament, who went on as the SPD candidate and didn't do well, etc., to also be present. So even though the Europeans hummed and hawed We had him brought in the dinner, which was actually a substantive part of what was going on. We also had the president of the European Investment Bank brought in. By the way, now one of the largest players in India in terms of sustainability action, the metro road, again a German too. Excellency, let me stop. Let me say, I was very honored to hear. Thank you.
Don't speak. You are so experienced, Ambassador.
A bureaucrat.
No.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Puri, for raising those important questions. These are very pertinent, and I'm sure the distinguished speakers, would address those issues. Let's move on to Mr. Klaus Welle. He has served the European Parliament close to over 2 decades and has been the former Secretary General of the European Parliament. He has served as Chief of Staff to the President of the European Parliament, as well as Director General of the EU Internal Policies in the Parliament's administration. But he's also, most interesting from the SIS point of view, a visiting professor at a number of international institutions, including in KU Leuven, London School of Economics, and Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership in New York. Over to you, Mr. Welle.
Yes, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I hope that you can understand me well. Yeah, good. So I'm very happy to address a meeting of the university already for the 3rd time in a year, which is following a contact I had with Professor Sheetal Sharma when she was visiting Brussels. And I'm also very happy to see the ambassador back, with whom I had many discussions when I was still in function in Brussels as the Secretary General of the European Parliament. I had hoped to be very much present in person. That's not possible this time, but I will very likely come next February with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and maybe then that's a possibility to establish that relationship again. My commitment with India dates already for more or less a decade. About 10 years ago, as Secretary General of the European Parliament, I started a partnership between the European Parliament and the Lok Sabha in India, for the very simple reason that I believe in the cooperation of continental democracies. The European Union is a continental democracy, India is a continental democracy, and very often we share similar challenges, which are simply related to the fact that we have to organize a huge space with very different traditions, cultural backgrounds, languages. We are both dealing with more than 20 languages in our space, but also a very complex relationship between the federal level of the system and then the states which constitute that federation. I had sent a leading staff member of the European Parliament to India so we started a process of mutual learning. India and Union have to go far beyond the parliamentary dimension. In fact, we are both facing challenges to our territorial integrity. For the moment, we have a hot war in Europe. Russia has aggressed Ukraine, trying to occupy and insert into Russia a part or the whole of Ukraine. And when you see on the European map, when you have a look at the European map, you see basically that nowadays there are 2 diverging principles on the European continent. You have in the West and in the center the European Union of Citizens and States, which is the European Union, based on the rule of law, based on freedom to join, but also freedom to leave, as was demonstrated by the United Kingdom, and which is based on a relationship of equals among the participating states. And you have in the east of the continent, Russia, which tries to reintroduce the rules of empire, which were our past in the 19th and early 20th century. So the war in Ukraine is not just about Ukraine. It's basically a war about the future rules on the continent. And we have to defend that the future is also one of mutual respect, respect of territorial integrity and sovereignty. At the same time, this war is changing the nature of the European Union. We are living now in times of weaponization of everything. So it's not just with military means, but we see that Russia has tried to weaponize food, has tried to weaponize energy, trying to threaten Europeans that we would be sitting in the cold during the winter. We have seen attempts, and we are still seeing attempts to weaponize refugees. And these are areas where the competence is not with NATO, but these are the strong points of the European Union itself. So it's the European Union, not NATO, that passed altogether 11 sanction packages. And we have seen that because of the weaponization of everything, nowadays, in order to secure the continent, the European Union and NATO have become complementary. So the European Union is on the way to become also a security and defense union, as already envisaged in the treaties. I'm currently working myself with the Martin Center on ideas for the next legislature, how we could strengthen that role and empower the member states of the European Union to play a more important role and become more equal partners within the NATO construct. And the European Union has the keys in its hands to do that. We need an internal market for armament products. We need to be able to produce in scale and not just in small series. We need to assure transport and logistics, which is possible for the European Union because in our multi-annual financial framework, we already have a budget line for military mobility. We need to assure that also in the area of science, there is more investment from the EU budget in dual-use products, which serve both for military and civil purposes. Michel Barnier, already during Jean-Claude Juncker's presidency of the European Commission, proposed the establishment of a civil protection service. And I think the implementation is absolutely overdue. And the European Union can also help to fill strategic capability gaps, like, for example, in space or in intelligence or in long-range aviation capabilities. So we are ahead of a new term of the European Commission, another 5 years starting 2024. And at the beginning of the mandate, the European institutions, the Parliament, the Council, the Commission, are discussing intensively what should be the priorities for the next 5 years. And I have the hope and the confidence that defense will play a major role in this, given the experiences we have made with the aggression against Ukraine over the now last nearly 2 years. Also in this context, the cooperation with India has become very dynamic. Both the European Union and India share a very similar approach, given that we are both committed to a free, open, inclusive, and rules-based maritime order in the Indo-Pacific region. This is underpinned by the respect for territorial integrity, sovereignty, democracy, rule of law, freedom of navigation and overflight, unimpeded lawful commerce, and peaceful resolution of conflicts in accordance with the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. We can see, especially since the year 2000, roughly, that this relationship has become very dynamic, making progress nearly on a monthly basis. So the important steps taken show the dynamism and the commitment, starting probably with the 15th EU-India Summit in July 2020, which agreed a very precise EU-India strategic partnership roadmap, clearly including the areas of security and defense. We then had the EU-India Leaders Summit in May 2021, where Modi and the 27 heads of state and government convened in person, and the following EU-Indo-Pacific strategy from September 2021. In June 2022, we had the first EU-India defense consultations, and in October 2023, already the third EU-India Maritime Security Dialogue. Also in October 2023, or so only 1 month ago, a first joint naval exercise with the European Union, not just with a member state. And in November 2023, so just now, a couple of days ago, we had for the first time an EU defense attaché taking up the responsibilities in India. What is the background? The background is that clearly the European Union is in a process of diversification in the region, with very prominent roles for India, Japan, and Australia. I think these countries have to be very close to us because we are all based on parliamentary democracy, so on a similar base of values. China built up a major fleet, and this poses major security challenges for the Indo-Pacific, especially because China has still territorial claims on land, but also on the sea towards its neighbors. And I believe that in this situation, India and the European Union can be close partners and a factor of stability for the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Welle, for bringing in the centrality of Europe's security aspects, specifically in terms of the Ukrainian conflict and the kind of turmoil that Europe had witnessed since then. But thank you also for bringing in the India's concerns in terms of the maritime security, the Indo-Pacific region, and a host of other, including on counterterrorism aspects. Thank you very much for those comments. And the audience would probably like to raise some questions at the end, please. So please stay back. Now we move on to Professor Hans-Gert Pöttering. He's a lawyer by profession, historian, and politician. He was just mentioning that he was the public servant for 35 years. 35 years. He was the president of the European Parliament from January 2007 to July 2009. He served as a member of the European Parliament continuously since his first election in 1979 until 2014, a decade ago, nearly a decade ago. He has been the longest serving member of Parliament in the European Parliament. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kondapalli, and dear Professor Sharma, dear Professor Zaka, dear representative of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Adrian Hack, and dear ambassador. So you know all the answers, but I will try to give the answers during my little speech. I'm not always referring to you, ambassador, but you will find, and you are very intelligent, when I give the answers in my little speech. So I'm very honored, and dear Klaus, listening in Brussels, and especially dear students. I had a seminar myself at the University of Osnabrück and Osnabrück is in Lower Saxony. And just this year, we celebrate the Peace Treaty of Westphalia. You know, there was a 30 years war from 1618 to 1648. And we are celebrating just now 375 years of this Treaty of Westphalia, which is called after the cities of Münster and Osnabrück. And Klaus Welle said, you are a great federation. We in Germany have a federal system as well. And although Osnabrück and Münster are quite near, 50 kilometers, Osnabrück is Lower Saxony and Münster is North Rhine-Westphalia. So I discussed with my students these challenges we had in the 17th century. And now I'm coming to my little speech. I'm not an expert on defense anymore, but everything belongs together. And I tell you, there is not a separate part of politics. Everything is interconnected. And I want, if you allow, speak in 3 points. First, the European Union and its development. This would be the seminar for weeks, but I make it short. Then some remarks concerning Ukraine, and then the relations with India. And I want to tell you, when I was a pupil and when I started to read, I was fascinated by India, by Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and others. And so India always was very near to me. And the reason why I am here now is a meeting with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. I invited him to the European Parliament in 2008 when I was president of the European Parliament during the year of the Dialogue of Cultures. And so he came the 4th of December 2008. And he invited me for his 85th birthday, which took part 3 years ago. And we had prepared the whole visit already, and then we had the COVID pandemic, and the trip was cancelled. And when we met him, and it was a beautiful meeting, he said, I will be, if he's still alive, but he thinks he will be 110 years old finally. I think I can say this, not to be indiscreet, but I think this I can say. And he said, I will be 90 years in 2 years. And I invite you. And you come to Dharamsala again. And I said, Your Holiness, I will 2 months after you, if I'm still alive, become 80 years. So we have a good reason to meet again. And hopefully we will meet again here if you are not disappointed too much with my speech. So now I'm speaking about what I want to say. If you allow me, I start with a very personal background. I was born the 15th of September 1945. I think there's nobody in the room who is older than myself. And if I look into your faces, you are the future of India and Asia, and so on and so on. And the Second World War in Europe was over the 8th of May 1945. And my father was a simple soldier. And he was killed in February 1945, somewhere in Eastern Germany, which is now the western part of Poland, but is the European Union. So I never saw my father. And I think it's 1 year that I looked into the letters he wrote to my mother. She died in 2001, and I never had looked into the letters she got from my father. And I had a 3 years older brother. Unfortunately, he died some years ago. And the last words of his last letter to my mother was, your beloved husband, his name was Wilhelm, and my beloved, her first name was Agnes. And then he added, your puppy. This is abbreviation of father. Your puppy. So I was mentioned in a letter, not living at that time. and he got to know that I was a result of his last visit to my mother. And so I was so touched reading this. And I think psychology, from the side of psychology, I think this experience, never have seen the own father that he was killed in a war, was my motivation to be engaged in the unification of Europe. And I think, without being a psychologist, I think this is right. And so I had the chance to be elected, although I was already 32 years old. But for our group, the Christian Democratic Group, the European People's Party, I was the youngest member in 1979. It was the very first European election. And when I entered the parliament in Strasbourg, and we are meeting partly in Strasbourg, partly in Brussels, it's a little bit of complication, but let's not speak about that now because it's not a big problem. When I entered the parliament, it was for me like a miracle to be part of this multinational parliament in Europe. And I was very often asked in the election campaign, why do you want to be a member of the European Parliament? You have nothing to say in Brussels and in Strasbourg. Why don't you want to be a member of your national parliament? And my answer was, it's right, we have little power now, but we will fight peacefully to get power for the European Parliament. And I will not go all the stages through how we succeeded to become the co-legislator with the government. Before the European election in 1979, the governments decided the European law. And very often, not the ministers were present. And I have great respect for the ambassadors. If you said you were a bureaucrat, no, you are or was an ambassador. But very often the ministers were represented by officials, and they even didn't come to the meetings, were the officials. And we, as European Parliament, demanded that we were part of the decision process. And then we had the different treaties. In the 80s, there was a treaty called Single Act. It's a little bit complicated. Then the Treaty of Maastricht, which laid the basis for the European currency. Then the Treaty of Amsterdam, the Treaty of Nice, and finally, and I was very much part of that development, the Treaty of Lisbon. And so today, dear students, today the European Parliament is an equal partner of the Council, that means the 27 member states, in legislation, except taxes. It's money, and the member states did not want to give us this responsibility. But in all fields, we got the co-legislation. And it was a very, very difficult procedure. For me, one, except the Brexit, that Britain left the European Union, which is an historic mistake for the British, and they don't become an empire again because they leave the European Union, what some people thought, especially a former prime minister. I will not mention his name because I don't like him at all, but that's another point. And it was terrible for me. I always tried to keep the British in our group, the British Conservatives, and most of them were excellent people, but there were some crazy ones. And the crazy ones finally, unfortunately, succeeded that Britain left the European Union. But let us leave this aside. So one of the greatest disappointments was when the so-called constitutional treaty failed in 2005. There was a referendum first in France and then in the Netherlands, and the constitutional treaty to give a constitution to the European Union failed. It was terrible for us. And many people saw already the European Union going down. And there were a handful of people, or even a little bit more, who thought that we must find an alternative to keep the substance of the constitutional treaty. And in France, the then incoming president, Nicolas Sarkozy, he was elected in May 2007, said in his election campaign, we will have a new treaty, a short treaty. I said to him, this will not be possible with 27 countries. But what was important, he said, I will bring the new treaty to our two parliaments, to the Assemblée Nationale, Parliament, and the Senate. And this was a very decisive step. And in Germany, we had the Chancellor, Angela Merkel, who was my, I cannot say chairman because she is a woman, but and I don't like the word chair. So she was the leader of our party, the CDU party, and she was very much engaged. I was president of the European Parliament, and so there were other people, and we changed a little bit the constitutional treaty, and so that the member states could accept the new treaty. And then the treaty, this finally Lisbon Treaty, failed in a referendum in Ireland. And at that time, the Catholic Church was very powerful. And there was a colleague from Denmark, a former communist, who said to the Irish people, this treaty allows abortion. And this treaty had nothing to do with abortion, but it was a lie. What do you say? False news? No.
Fake news.
Fake news, yeah. You see, I'm 78 years old, so fake news. And so they voted finally no. And I was invited after this no to Ireland, and I was invited to the Catholic Church, to the bishops, and there was a cardinal. And I said, Your Excellencies, if I can give you a recommendation, please speak positively about this treaty, because the dignity of human beings and children and so on is in the treaty. And not because I said that, but then they had a second vote, and the Irish are clever people. They want to get always something. And so finally, the voters said yes. And so we got the Lisbon Treaty, which is now so to say, the constitution of the European Union. And what I want to tell you, the students, never give up. Never give up. There's always, not always, but very often a solution, and you have to fight for it. And when most politicians think that there is no solution, Konrad Adenauer, not the founder, but our foundation is named after him, the first chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany after 49, he always said, when most politicians think there's no solution anymore, then the real political work starts. And this is my experience. So never give up, fight as long as you can, peacefully, of course, and everything is only safe until it is safe. And don't think today, tomorrow we have a decision, everything will be fine. Be careful until the end the decision is taken, because something can always happen. So this is my advice, if you allow me. And now I'm coming to defense. I was chairman of the subcommittee Security and Disarmament in the European Parliament from 1984 to 1994, a long time ago. And when we started to discuss security and defense questions, many people said, and we were at that time still the European Economic Community, which then became the European Community and now the European Union, people laughed at us. That they said, now these crazy idealistic members of the European Parliament, they discuss now security and defense. And I didn't mind that people laughed at us and thought we are naive, because my concept of European integration always was that we need to be strong in all fields of politics, that included foreign affairs, security, and defense as well. And then you should know this, in 1954, there was a project for a European defense community, including a European army. And this failed in a vote, or even they didn't vote, they didn't bring it on the agenda of Parliament in Paris, in France. And it failed because the right wing, the nationalists, and the left wing, the communists, were against the treaty. Stalin in Moscow, the dictator, did not want a strong Western Europe. And Konrad Adenauer said, once this had failed, this was his deepest disappointment in his long chancellorship. And so we had to start again, and we did it in the European Parliament. And now we have a meeting of the defense ministers of the European Union. And so we made a lot of progress. And I should add something, what I forgot. Somebody mentioned Monnet. Who was it who mentioned Monnet? Jean Monnet. You mentioned Jean Monnet. Imagine in 1945, the war ended. And unfortunately, my country, the National Socialists, started it. And they represented a totalitarian state. And in 1950, there was a foreign minister, Robert Schuman, who, together with Jean Monnet, made a proposal to Germany. Let's combine our interests and let's interfere our interests together. So not a balance of interests, but we have to connect the interests and let us have peace. And this was a political revolution, because normally when we had a war in Europe, and almost in each generation, or so to say, in each decade, not in each decade, but in each generation, there were wars. The Germans started to be stronger, the French started to be stronger, they built up arms, weapons, and so on. And now the system was totally different. And they united in the 50s steel and coal, which at that time was the basis for making war. And this was extraordinary. And this was a totally new concept. And so the European Union in itself, and this is very important for the future, in itself is a peace movement. But there is a sister of peace, and that is freedom. So peace and freedom always have to come together. And then we had this development in the 80s. In 1979, when I became a member of the parliament, if somebody would have told me the 3rd of October 1990, Germany, your country, will be reunited, and in May, the 1st of May 2004, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Slovenia will join the European Union. They were communist countries. They were part of the Eastern world. They were part of communism. They were part of the Warsaw Pact. I would have said, this will one day happen, but not in my lifetime. And it happened. And so everything is possible in politics if the people want it. And the people in Eastern Europe, which is now not in Eastern Europe only, we always make the mistake, those countries are Central Europe, but we very often say Eastern Europe, but they now the Eastern countries of the European Union. And I made this mistake only once until somebody knocked me, not physically, and I never made this mistake again. So we have to believe in the people. And I'm coming back to this point when I speak about our relations. So everything is possible. And this shows the great progress we have made because the people wanted it. And the people asked for democracy. And I think most of you are not Christians. And there were many aspects. Gorbachev played an excellent role. President Bush, the older one, played an important role. Helmut Kohl, the Chancellor of Unity, played an important role. But there was one person who had no power, no military power. And Stalin has said about him, how many divisions has the Pope? And there was a Pope from Poland, John Paul II. And he went to Poland when Poland still was a communist country. And millions of people came to listen to him. And he said, change the world, change this world. And so solidarity, this Gewerkschaft, what is Gewerkschaft? Union, the Union of Solidarity with Lech Walesa, they went their way. And so finally, the communism collapsed. So be optimistic. And My advice to you, dear students, is the glass should always be half full and not half empty. Because if you think the glass is half empty, then you are pessimistic. But when you think that the glass is half full, then you have a good basis to go on. Now I come to my second point, Ukraine. I made the mistake for a long time that I said, since 70 years, there is peace in Europe. This is wrong. There was in the 90s war on the Balkans. That is Europe. But it's not the European Union. I should always have said, and even the presidents of the Republic of Germany made these mistakes, so I'm not the only one. We should have told to the people, there has never been war in the European Union, which was in the beginning European Economic Community and then the European Community, never in the European Union, because we are an institution which is based on law. The law has the power and not the power dictates the law. And this is really the basic thing of the European Union. But now there is war in Europe, but outside the European Union. And I'm very clear, you may have a different point of view as Indians, I hope not too much, but what Putin, he is a dictator in the Kremlin, what he is doing is against the international law. And we should not allow any country to attack other countries, what Putin has done with his war, which he calls an operation, military operation, because he wants to prevent the world war. And we have to support the Ukrainians because they are starting to build a democracy, to fight against corruption. And Putin does not want a successful Ukraine, because if Ukraine is successful, then he fears there might be an uprising or a movement for democracy in Russia as well. And so we have to do everything to support Ukraine. And I think it's fantastic if you look at the person, at the president. He was an actor. I would not say a clown, but how he behaves now, this is really statesmanship, and politics and problems can change the people. And this we see nowadays in Ukraine. And I think we have to help them. And the Ukrainians have to decide themselves when there is time for dialogue. It's their decision. But until they take the decision, we have to support them. My third and last point is the relations with India. Be self-confident. In your country live 1.4 billion people. In China, 1.3, I guess, less. So you are the number one. And there is a big difference between the communist China and India. China is a totalitarian country. You are a democracy with all the problems democracies have. We in the European Union and Germany, so you have your challenges as well. But you are a young people. And this is a great advantage, at least for the next 20, 30 years. And use this chance. And China, the population, will in the next 40, 50 years decrease, go down by what experts say 50%. So don't overestimate China, because once you overestimate the country, then you become then you are afraid. But don't underestimate China, because if you underestimate China, it may become a greater threat as it is already today. And I say one cannot trust China. When you speak to the Dalai Lama, but he was not so political, it was rather religious, philosophical, so I cannot take him as an example. But I spoke to the parliamentarians in the exile in Dharamsala, and they told me that the Chinese, the communists, take almost 1 million children, beginning at the age of 6 years, away from their children, and they are educated in communist Chinese school, so to prevent that they develop, and they have to stay there near the school, and they have their lodging, how to say, boarding school, so they have to stay there. They are not with their families. So to prevent that they develop an identity, a Tibetan identity. So we have to be aware. And the Chinese had an agreement with Britain, as far as Hong Kong is concerned, 2 systems, 1 state. And this should have gone on until 2048. And they broke this commitment. So we cannot trust them. Of course, we have to deal with that. And I think your exports, the exports from China are quite high. And that's the same for Germany. But we have to be careful in our relation. We have to continue cooperation, dialogue, of course. But in the field of technology and in the field of information, we have to be very careful that they, in the end, don't get the possibility to supervise us and that they know everything about us in India, and maybe less a problem for you in India, but in Germany and the European Union. So we have to distinguish between the different parts. And the main point, what unites us, dear friends, and I believe it from the bottom of my heart, you in India believe in the individual and in the dignity of the human beings. We saw the phrase in your new parliament which referred to the dignity of the human being. Of course, we know how difficult it is to realize the dignity for the human being. To speak just theoretically about it is very easy, but people who are poor, people who have no education, that do not live in a situation of dignity. But if we accept the principle and that we accept the dignity of each human being, and if we have this individual approach, then we are on the right way. And I think this is your thinking in India, and it's our thinking in Germany and in the European Union. We don't believe in the collective. If you believe in the collective and in an ideology, then you have the right, in brackets, to do everything with the human beings, because the human being has to serve the ideology. And that's why in totalitarian countries are hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dead people, because the dictators justify the death of the people in favor of their ideology. And so I am in favor of building an alliance of the democracies. So I'm quite near to what Klaus Welle has said already. And part of this alliance of democracy should be India, the European Union, Japan, Australia, and some others who want to join, so that we together have the chance to defend our common values. And I define our values as such. First, the dignity of the human being. Second, freedom. 3, democracy. 4, legal order. And 5, peace. But we have to be in the position to defend our values. And so I think we as Germans made mistakes in the recent years. And so I answer the questions which were put to me. We Germans have made a mistake after unification. We thought defense is not so important anymore. And we were dependent almost for 100% on gas from Russia. And so we have made big mistakes, but we have learned our lesson. And the present German government, it's not my political orientation, but I defend what they are deciding now in the field of defense. And the defense minister is from my region. Pistorius is his name. And I know him quite well. So I think he is the right person in this position. And so we Germans have learned our lesson. And I'm not an expert to speak now what we should do in the Pacific and what you should do. But my advice is, once we agree on the principles of our societies, we have to support us, we have to support you, and I ask you to support us. And so I think we have the moral and the value-based possibility to go into the future if we have the political will. And the political will is important not only for the politician, You are the young generation. You are the generation of the 21st century. And it's very decisive that you are engaged in society and don't give it only to the politicians. Engage yourself, be member of parties and organizations and so on, and meet other people. There are so many prejudices in the world. And if you don't know other cultures, you think badly about those cultures. What you don't know, you don't accept. So be ready for dialogue. And I'm so happy that in my political life, when I was chairman of our group, of the Christian Democratic Group, which is called European People's Party, I was chairman for 7.5 years. I always supported the Erasmus program. Erasmus means that you can meet people, students, you have exchanges, and there's even now the Erasmus Mundus, that means for the whole world. And I supported it always. And sometimes we really had to fight against the governments because they always wanted to reduce the money for Erasmus. So I think if one takes everything together, we are living in challenging times, but this is normally so in the history. But the times now are especially challenging. And it's my very deep belief, and that's why I'm very thankful that I could combine my visits to His Holiness the Dalai Lama with meeting politicians, meeting businessmen, and especially meeting students, because you are the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pöttering, for that passionate speech. You mentioned about the never give up in terms of the European Parliament and the integration process that you personally had led to. And also very interesting is the balance of interest rather than balance of power. In the background, steam coal alliance, France, Franco-German. That's very interesting. The second aspect is to be persistent in the background of the Ukrainian conflict and the events that were unfolded in the recent times. And finally, you mentioned for the third element of your speech on relations with India, to be confident of the challenges that we are facing in this part of the world. Thank you very much for the comments. And now let me request Professor Harsh Pant to deliver his remarks. Professor Pant is an advisor to the school here in his capacity as a vice president of the Observer Research Foundation, and also a dear friend. We knew for more than a decade, but professionally he is a faculty member at the International Relations Department at the King's College, London, and a director honorary of the Delhi School of Transnational Affairs at Delhi University. He writes regularly for various Indian and international media outlets. I suspect he may have already written a piece here while listening to us. That is the prolific nature of his publications. And so over to you, Harsh.
Thank you, Professor Kondapalli, and thank you for having me. I think it's very difficult to say anything now that Dr. Pöttering had so expansively articulated not only his own personal journey, but also I think the vision behind European integration. And I must say that it's almost a masterclass. I think you should all give them an off for a week, that they have learned so much in a few hours. I really think that you should have time to question and to ask Professor Pöttering about these questions later on. The fact that we are talking about Europe in India's security calculus, I think that itself is an achievement. A few years before, I don't think this question would even arise. This security in Europe, India, I think those, as I think Dr. Pöttering pointed out, they were not really clubbed together. The European Union itself articulated a vision of being a normative power. And I think I remember words being spoken to the effect that the European Union is not a geopolitical actor; it doesn't do geopolitics. So I think, in some ways, once you remove geopolitics from the equation, the relationship between India and Europe and European Union became largely situated around two trading partners that share some values. But beyond that, I think there was a struggle to take it toward the strategic architecture, where you could define the long-term security agenda and work together. And I think recent developments and everyone, what we heard earlier on, the speakers have alluded to the trajectory of that evolution, which has been both interesting from the perspective of how European Union has evolved as an actor, and I think it should be pointed out how Indian foreign policy priorities have evolved. So I think if you combine the two, you get a very interesting story about this relationship and how this relationship has been completely transformed in a matter of a few years, from being primarily an economic relationship to being a very robust relationship across multiple domains. And I thought that, given that we are in SIS and I have a slightly different background than other speakers, I thought I would also encourage and frame my very brief comments around how do we think about this change? What are the sources of this change? And because ultimately, as students of this relationship, you need to answer more fundamental questions than simply when will the strategic partnership commence, what are the documents, and what seems to be happening at the official level. And I would encourage you to, all of you are students of IR, to think in terms of conceptual categories, right? If you are thinking in terms of the structural realities of the day, I think it's inevitable, if you are having this kind of structural flux in the international system, that two actors like India and the EU would come to a recalibrated assessment of where they stand vis-a-vis each other's security relationship. I think most speakers have talked about the balance of power changing, the rise of some powers like China, Eurasia landscape changing, Indo-Pacific landscape changing, India rising as a matter of fact, and the European Union recalibrating its assessment of how it wants to project itself around the world. So when you look at this flux in the balance of power, it's inevitable that you would come to an assessment that, look, India needs partners, European Union needs partners, and here is a partnership that is almost given to you on a platter, given all the things that you talked about, values included. So I think in some ways the structural realities that presented themselves to India and are presenting themselves to India are allowing us to ask some of these questions that we were reluctant to ask before. And the structural changes that Europe and European Union is going through is pushing European Union in a direction that European Union itself was reluctant to go in. So I think it's the fact that European Union today conceives of itself as a geopolitical entity is a reflection of how the structural dynamic around it has changed, how the world order has evolved rapidly, and how certain actors are almost making it inevitable, and that these two actors like India and European Union should get their act together. And at the structural level, I will also point out that, look, it is also a question at times of globalization and where economic globalization has taken us, and what kind of questions we are asking about globalization today. If you think of globalization today, you don't think of positive ideas coming together. You think of deglobalization, de-risking, decoupling. It inevitably means, I think earlier speakers have alluded to, that nation states, countries, actors in the international system are looking for diversification. Now, if you're looking for diversification of your trade relationships, supply chains, I think it is inevitable that again, India and EU would come together and think through some of the implications. I think Dr. Pöttering talked about almost, it's very attractive to call it an alliance of democracies or a coalition of democracies. But I think that's where we are. When we used to say, look, let's trade and become friends, we are saying let's trade among friends first. Let's try to figure out let's work on technology. Technology sharing has become a big issue. Both European Union and the US are imposing extremely difficult conditions on certain countries when it comes to technology. Whereas India is given an open field because there is a trust factor here that is inevitable in the way we are thinking of how we engage with on this issue in particular. So I think when you're looking at these factors, evaluate those factors and think how those factors are contributing to this relationship. What has changed in that relationship that we are asking these kind of questions? What has changed in the relationship as a result of the structural realities, both strategic as well as geo-economic that are driving us to ask some of these questions. Similarly, I think institutionally, if you think of the institutional factors around you, you look at a matrix of institutions that are weak, that are vulnerable, that are not appropriate to the challenges of 21st century, and therefore the push towards new coalitions. So I think India, EU working together in third countries, we were in a different, I think some of us were in different contexts earlier this morning, and we were talking of India, EU working together in third countries, like in third places, Africa, Latin America. I mean, these are new coalitions emerging as a response to our times, because the existing institutions are not working. So when you talk of, we live in the age of minilaterals, plurilaterals, which are being defined by their ad hocism, by their informality. So what Dr. Pöttering was laying out for you was a very expansive engagement with the whole question of European Union and how European Union came into being and became such a robust institution. Today, there is around the world a sense that existing institutions are not working. A lot of these institutions are not responding. So what do? Do we wait for new institutions to be created, or do we create some of these institutions among like-minded countries? I think the allusion to some of these actors coming together and defining the terms of that engagement is a very attractive one for most countries. And therefore, again, it is very natural that India and the EU would think about collaborating on a range of issues. So you can pick an issue and you can see how extensive that cooperation has been. Ambassador Puri talked about that there are multiple kinds of securities and insecurities. And I think you can pick any of those: energy security, economic domain, cyber, technology, and on all these issues, the kind of equations that we are witnessing and the kind of desire that we are witnessing among like-minded countries to create these coalitions, again, is a response to the institutional vulnerability that we face, that we don't have robust institutions. And how do you respond then? You respond by creating, and that brings India and the EU together. And the last point, I think, which has been mentioned in different ways by different speakers, is I think the ideas matter. Sometimes we don't think they do, but ideas matter more than we realize. And I think the whole idea of a united Europe there was a time, Jean Monnet and Schuman, the idea was born, and then it culminated into something that has given EU the presence that it has today. Similarly, I think the ideas are changing. If you look around the world today, you live in challenging times, but challenging times are also very exciting times for scholars and for observers. They may be difficult for practitioners, but I think if you're outside looking in, you find there is a lot of, there's so much new that is happening, right from the concept of the Indo-Pacific. I mean, a lot of your textbooks would not even have the term, even today. Books are being written about it. But I think it's the sense that Indo-Pacific brings something new to the table and pushes you into relooking at your own mental maps of the world. It's a great, I think, beginning for you to think about. Look, what changed? Suddenly now you had a new maritime zone, strategic zone in front of you, and every other actor is relating to that. So European Union's presence in the Indo-Pacific, India's desire to play a larger role in the Indo-Pacific, they bring you together. They bring India and EU together, unlike any time in the past that we have seen. And that culminates in a larger strategic vision. So when you're looking at the role of ideas, right from geopolitics to again terrorism, I think Professor Kondapalli mentioned. I mean, there was a time when India used to talk about terrorism and European used to say, well, this is your internal matter, and this is something that that is a human rights problem. I think we have seen the nature of terrorism evolve, and European Union's own conception of terrorism evolve. And that again brings the two entities together. The understanding that Europe today has about India's security predicament is very different from what it had a decade back. And so it's again very natural that would culminate in a more robust engagement, in a more substantive engagement, because security relationships are contingent on an assessment of each other's interests. And that, I think, has happened in recent years. And finally, I would say that ideas around Indian foreign policy have also evolved. So, when you think of non-alignment in some ways was an idea where Indian policymakers used to say partnerships are constraining. That let's not enter into very close partnerships, particularly with the West, because that constrains your options. I think now it's been inverted. Now we are saying that, look, we want to be partners. partnerships are good. Partnerships expand our ability to deal with the other side. So I think this idea that you can be a part of the Quad, you can be part of the BRICS, you can be part of SCO, this is in some ways liberating. So I think that assessment of ideas around Indian foreign policy evolving also has a lot to do with the fact that both as ideas around European Union have changed, ideas around India have changed, and all the things that Dr. Pöttering mentioned about this being a country looking at the future, very optimistic, youthful, demographic. All of those are related to this fundamental assessment of where India is, where India wants to go, and which are India's which are going to be India's most important partners. At ORF, we do an annual, that is Observer Research Foundation, we do an annual survey of Indian youth on foreign policy. And it consistently shows that there is an upward trajectory when it comes to Europe. That I think more and more of India's youth in particular look at Europe and European Union as a very important partner. And I think that in some ways is the story of our time, that the fact that we are having this discussion in a room full of very young people. I don't know whether you have been forced to being here by your teachers or not, but the fact that that it's a packed room talking about India, Europe, and security calculus is a reflection of those changing times. So I think appreciate that, learn more, and do big things in India-EU relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harsh, for bringing in the Indian concerns related to the inability of many of the institutions that have not really worked and the need for plurilateral institutions in various subjects. I think that was very appropriate for the audience here. Let me assure you, we all came on a voluntary basis. No gold or diamonds are given to anyone, no such incentives. But of course, the ideas have been the main attraction here. As you rightly mentioned, ideas also drive history to an extent. So those are the things that have been mentioned here. Well, we have an online participation as well. We have a number of questions that have been raised with this interesting round of ideas that went around. So,
Excellency, sir, kindly have a look at the screen this side. We are joined by more than 700 students from India, from St. Xavier's, from 3 colleges in Delhi University. And there is a small request from them. And they are so mesmerized by we have been getting WhatsApp messages, just to wave at them so that they feel encouraged by your presence, first of all, before they come up with their volume of questions, please. Wait. This is for the students, those who are actually very enthusiastic to listen to you. I hope you fulfilled your wish.
So we have a volley of questions. Kindly reply to these. If anyone wants to raise a question from the backside, we have a mic dedicated to that place. So please come up there if you want to raise a question. But we also have several questions already asked in the online session. Let me just check this. So in the live chat, there is a mention, will India be able to reaccommodate Russia with Western world in medium to long term, making Europe more stable entity in India's calculus as being Indian foreign policy vision? Harsh, would you like to address this question on India-Russia relations and what does that mean for medium to long term? Both of you. The second question is, will PRC's Belt and Road Initiative 2.0 will affect Europe and its geopolitics and geoeconomics in India?
Question for you, sir.
Does China's Belt and Road Initiative impact on Europe? And from that, on Indian security calculus.
You mean the Belt and
Road Initiative.
Yes. Okay. I think this initiative, Belt, you say Belt and Roads?
Yeah.
Belt and Roads initiative was an instrument, or is an instrument, by the Chinese government to get more influence in the world. And my impression is, although I'm not an expert on that, that countries who are part of this Belt and Road initiative have not only positive experiences, and they realize if they are part of this and in a great dimension, they might lose their autonomy, especially as far as finances are concerned, and that finally Beijing might have a sort of superiority about of these countries. And what I hear when in Africa, I'm not very often in Africa, but some years ago, and when I speak to Africans, that the quality is not always very good. When the Chinese build infrastructure, the quality is not very good. And I learned here in New Delhi that the Prime Minister from Italy, Giorgia Meloni, has been here recently, and that Italy, and I think it was the only, except Hungary, I guess, the country from the European Union, that she went out of this initiative. And let's watch what the development is for the future, because it's an instrument that China wants to dominate others. Let's be careful. But I think the Chinese, in the end, will not be so successful as they would like to be.
Thank you. There is a question for Dr. Welle. What impact do European investments and partnerships have on India's defense and security infrastructure? Dr. Welle, are you around?
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me? I didn't hear the question. Sorry.
Yes. What impact do European investments and partnerships have on India's defense and security calculus or infrastructure? Sorry.
Yeah. Look, I believe that that the European Union is about to start a major reflection about its own security and defense policy, and therefore also about its defense internal market. And that's what I was making reference to. As Hans-Gert Pöttering has said, after the end of the Cold War, people naively believed that confrontations are over, and we underinvested into our own defense industry. So I hope that there is a comprehensive program in the next legislature of the European Commission that's got to be negotiated also with the European Parliament, because when a new Commission president comes into office, she has to find agreement with the European Parliament on the program, on the people, and also on institutional issues. And Hans-Gert Pöttering has been a major player in this in the past. So my hope and my belief is that security and defense come to the forefront, and that defense will be done in a much more efficient way. And I also agree with what Hans-Gert Pöttering has called the Alliance for Democracies. After 1989, 1990, we thought that the system conflict is over and that it doesn't matter where you invest. But I think we have a new system question, and the system question is between, in fact, democracies and autocracies, especially if those autocracies are aggressive towards their neighbors. And that means that democracies have to cooperate more closely in the exchange of technology, but also in the area of defense. And I think India here can be a major partner for the European Union.
Thank you. Before others gather thoughts here for raising questions, we would like to invite the Ranchi College of St. Xavier's. Madam Sinha, are you around? Can you please take charge of the queries from your students? Dr. Shreya?
They're really fortunate to be connected.
Please speak into the mic.
Ours. Good evening, Johar. Warm greetings from Jharkhand. It was an amazing lecture, and the intellectual churning which has taken place in the last 2 hours, we could experience the heat. It was a very insightful discussion. We have some questions from the students who are very curious. They have various doubts and they need some clarifications. The first question is, the security dilemma in 2023 becomes all the more complex today. On the one hand, we have traditional security challenges like the fear of not being involved in the Ukraine-Russia crisis and its new Cold War dimensions, and the clash of civilizations between the West and the non-West in the Gaza Strip. On the other hand, we have non-traditional security challenges like cross-border terrorism, the rise of artificial intelligence as a disruptive technology, illegal fishing and the issue of sea piracy, global warming and the alarming increase in the rise of average annual temperature, income inequality, gender violence, ethnic conflicts, and genocide. How do you see European Union and India collaborating in building a new security architecture in the near future to resolve these challenges? And this question is addressed to Professor Harsh V. Pant.
Since you mentioned they are not voluntary corps.
So should I repeat the question?
Yeah. I lost.
The question is, how does European Union address the security dilemmas that came about in the light of Russian invasion of Ukraine, as well as the Gaza Strip events recently, and also in terms of the non-traditional security challenges like global warming, illegal fishing, and so on and so forth. But there is also a question related to artificial intelligence. How does European Union address these issues? Is that
I have a
correct?
very, very easy answer that all the questions are pertain to European Union. To Dr. Pöttering, I think he is the best person to answer since he's amidst us. I would take the cue from you, sir.
Okay, sir. Okay, I think very much for this question, because when the question concerning security is asked, I am thinking of my work as chairman of this subcommittee, Security and Disarmament, between 84 to 94, because we tried to define the word security. And security is not only military. Security is the question of diplomacy, of economy, of climate change. For instance, if you think to go a little bit deeper in this question, climate change, if finally farmers in Africa cannot get any food from their land anymore because it's too dry, they try to go to other places, and there will be migration. And they might go to Europe, and we cannot accept millions and millions in the European Union. And if we do so, our voters would not vote for democratic parties. So everything is connected. I think this is a message we have to understand. Everything is connected, and almost everything has a dimension in relation to security. And I was very happy, if you allow me to say it, in politics you have to say what the successes are, and if you don't say it, you will never be re-elected. But I don't want to be elected here, so, but I will give you an example, and I'm a little bit proud of it. The 23rd of April 2009, the first European legislation concerning the fight against climate change was signed by the Deputy Prime Minister of the Czech Republic. The Czechs had this half-year presidency of the European Union, and by the President of the European Parliament, who is sitting here now and has a privilege to be with you. And we decided in this first legislation, I hope I get the 3 points, until 2020 to achieve a reduction of CO2 by 20%, to get 20% renewables and 20% of reduction of energy consumption. Oh, I got them. Yesterday I forgot one aspect. So this was the first step. And I said, when I had signed it in my speeches as President of the European Parliament, we can be proud as European Union that we took the initiative. Maybe sometimes we in the European Union go too far and demand too far from our partners, but we started it, and I think this is good. And we have to understand that, to come back to security, that everything is connected, and we have to have a global understanding of security.
Ambassador, would you like to?
What will the European Union do, not what it should do?
We continue.
Yes.
We continue.
All right. St. Xavier's, do you have any more questions?
Thanks a lot, Professor Pöttering. There's another question, and it is addressed to Professor Srikanth Kondapalli. The question has been asked by Jaya Kumari. She's a student of final year, BA final year student. The question is, the assertive surge of Chinese economic and diplomatic involvement in the South Asian region can be viewed as an elevation in the already existing security challenges for India. How is EU being helpful for India in this regard?
Dr. Welle, can you please respond to this? How does European Union help the South Asian region in various categories, economic and others?
I cannot claim to be an expert, but I think our relationships are very, very developed, both on the issue of economic exchange, trade. But as has been elaborated during this conference, the European Union is not just an economic actor. It's a political actor, it's a geopolitical actor, and it's still a technology hub. We have the situation that many individual countries were already very active in the region. That's surely the case of France, which has special interest in the region, but also Italy. But we could see that over the last 3 years now, the European Union as a European institution is taking over and is coordinating with its member states very, very closely. So as the professor also said, we are seeing a shift by the fact that authoritarian regimes are becoming more and more aggressive to their neighbors. So Europe is reorganizing, the Pacific is reorganizing, India is reorganizing, and the Southeast Asian countries are also reorganizing their relationships.
Thank you. Shahid Bhagat Singh College, do you have any queries?
Yes, thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for a very illuminating session. We have a bunch of questions from our third year, second year, and first year honors. We have clubbed together the questions which are similar in nature. A question which has been asked many a times is with regards to EU-India partnership in terms of tackling the challenge of cybersecurity and maritime security. Students including Aman, Rajneesh, Rishi, Ronak, they have asked this question. And it is open to any speaker respond to these questions. There is another question on what is the role of European Union in looking at a peaceful solution of crisis, including the Russia-Ukraine crisis and Israel-Palestine conflict. So these are the two broad-based questions. There is a third question on COP28 as an emerging platform for EU to take up a pivotal role. And the way EU has underlined its challenge in terms of fossil fuels, the phasing out of fossil fuels, and on one hand, and the idea of a very limited technology that they have at their disposal on the other. So how do they resolve this dichotomy? This is from a third-year student, Udyat. And finally, there is a question on international organizations like UNSC and even European Union, to that matter. They have been focusing on establishing and promoting peace and cooperation. At the same time, there is an unequal power structure in the working of any of these organizations. So how does EU tackle that inequality of power hierarchy? And how does it bring about an equal representation and does away with the question of consolidation of power? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Pöttering, would you like to respond to this? One on maritime security, Russia-Ukraine conflict, COP28, and on United Nations Security Council.
Maybe that I give an answer, thank you, Professor, to the question of Ukraine and Gaza. I think the European Union is doing already very, very much as far as Ukraine is concerned. We support militarily, economically, and in other ways as well Ukraine, that Ukraine can defend itself against Russia. And the European Commission, together with the European Parliament, and there are two strong ladies, by the way, the President of the Commission is Ursula von der Leyen. She is from my region. And her father, Ernst Albrecht, was Prime Minister of Lower Saxony. And in the 80s, he wanted me to come to the politics in Lower Saxony, but I refused. And I'm very happy that I refused. But she is from a very important family, and she is a very tough lady. And I discussed it some hours ago in the representation of the European Commission. And there was a diplomat, he was just enthusiastic about Ursula von der Leyen, because if she had not achieved anything except supporting Ukraine, it would have been already worthwhile. So we are totally behind Ukraine. And they got the perspective to become a member of the European Union. And so we support Ukraine in all fields to become a more legal state, to build up a justice society, not a justice society, a legal society, fight against corruption and so on. So they get all our support. As far as Gaza is concerned, I made a speech before the Knesset, that is the Parliament of Israel. It was my most difficult speech I made in my life. So the meeting with you is just an experience of joy if I compare it to my speech before the Parliament in Israel, in Jerusalem. And I wanted to speak there what I believe. And my belief is that, and I said it in my speech, Palestinian mother who loses the son, or lady who loses her husband, cries just as much as an Israeli mother who loses her son or the husband. So for me, the European dignity is not something what applies only for Jews or for Christians or Muslims. And I always say a peaceful Muslim is nearer to me as a violent Christian. So this is my vision. So, and we must find a solution that accepts the dignity of all. But this is, of course, very, very theoretical. Now we have this terrible situation. What Hamas has done is a terrible crime. And Israel has a right to defend itself. And I think Hamas, we have to do everything that Hamas will not exist in the future. But there is a but. It's very difficult to find to fight Hamas and not to kill too many civilians. And so we must find practical ways that the civilians, that not too many civilians, you cannot prevent that some civilians are killed, but the Israelis have to find a way that not too many are killed. And I think there is one country, you may be critical to the United States. I am positive, but it depends who the president a little bit as well. But I'm not speaking about former presidents. I think we can be very content that we have a president now in the United States with Joe Biden. I wish he would be 20 years younger, but that he is a president who tells the Israelis not to exaggerate. And he said, we made in the United States mistakes after 9/11. We exaggerated. And he gives the lesson to Israel, and the United States is a country which is nearest to Israel, and Germany is near because of Holocaust and all these terrible developments in the Second World War. But the United States are the power. And he said, and I'm very happy about that, we have to come back to the two-state solution. That means Israel living in peace, but the Palestinians living in peace as well. And there are 700,000 settlers now from Israel in the West Bank. They take the land of the Palestinians, and we cannot allow this. So we have to respect both sides. And I think that this respect develops more and more between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And if you allow me, maybe I'm speaking too long. The day before I made my speech in the Knesset, the 30th of May 2007, the day before I was in Gaza City. I had a meeting with Mahmoud Abbas, the then elected president of Palestine. Now he is still in office, but without an election for, I don't know, 10 years or something. And our meeting was prepared in Ramallah, the main city of the West Bank. And then he asked me to come to Gaza City because he had negotiations with Hamas. And he is Fatah. So there are two organizations. The Fatah are more peaceful. And the Hamas, they are as they are and how they showed us how they are. And I was in his house then in Gaza City. And then some days later, it was a terrible situation when I crossed the roads and terrible. I was not afraid, but it was a very difficult atmosphere. And then some days, Mahmoud Abbas was not successful. And he asked me after our very good discussion, do you want to wash your fingers? That means you want to go to the toilet. And I said yes. And then 2 days later, I saw in a German newspaper his bathroom with two Hamas people, and they were with how should I say? Yeah, they had masks or something. You just could see the eyes, and everything was black. And this was the same room, and I realized the little things before the mirror and so on. And since then, Hamas took over the Gaza Strip, and now we are in the situation in which we are. So my message is to come back to the discussion of the two-state solution, and we have to demand from the Israel side to agree to it and not to continue to build settlements on the West Bank, because that's the land of the Palestinians.
Thank you very much for those replies. We have no time for Satyavati College. If you can send a message, we will read it out quickly. We also have ARSD College here present. If anyone wants to make a comment, please go to that mic. Anyone? Yes, please go ahead.
Speakers, my question being to Professor Pöttering. Keeping in mind the dynamic, changing nature of geopolitical scenarios, does Europe view India as more of a counterweight to anti-West influences like China in Asia, as more of an ideal entry point for Western ambitions in the Indo-Pacific, or does it view India as a nation which has potential to be the new leading state in a multipolar world, as a nation which has a potential for a permanent seat at the UNSC? While these ideas being correlated, what is the heavier emphasis by Europe being put on?
What is Europe's position?
Yeah. Thank you so much for your question. I made clear, hopefully, in my little speech that I give great importance to India. Because if India is not important, and you spoke, Professor, you spoke about BRICS, or somebody spoke about BRICS. If you are not important, then, for instance, in the BRICS cooperation, then China will take over. You, India, can make a balance. And that's why I want to encourage you that you are ready to accept responsibility, and a visible responsibility, not only in connection with BRICS, but in the world. And if finally the United Nations should have the courage and the possibility to really to change the Security Council, I certainly would be in favor that India is part of it as well. And I would like to see the European Union as such member of the Security Council as well. So my great message is, I'm not a politician anymore, but I'm engaged and I see people, even acting politicians. My advice is, be self-confident, know what you are, remain a democracy and keep a legal order. And once you have a value-based society, then you are strong because you have to defend something. And the Russian soldiers who fight against Ukraine, they don't know why they fight. But the soldiers of Ukraine, they know why they fight, because they want to live in peace and liberty. So it's encouragement to your great country.
Thank you very much. I think that is once again an electrifying message. With this, we conclude the session. May I request Professor Sheetal Sharma to make the mementos present to the speakers, and Dr. Shakti Srikanth to make a vote of thanks after that.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
May I request Dr. Shakti for vote of thanks, please?
Okay. Good evening. Good evening. As we draw the curtains on this enlightening panel discussion on Europe in India's security calculus, I'm honored and privileged to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the panelists, partner institutions, audience, organizing team who have made this event a resounding success. Firstly, a profound thank to Dean of SIs, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, for graciously chairing today's discussion. Your expertise, poise, adept moderation have been instrumental in shaping a coherent and insightful conversation. We are sincerely grateful for your valuable contribution. A special expression of thanks goes to the chairperson, Professor Bhaswati Sarkar, for her illuminating special remarks. Your profound insights have set the tone for the discussion, providing a comprehensive backdrop to the complex relationship between Europe and India in matters of security. Our gratitude extends to Professor Hans-Gert Pöttering, Mr. Klaus Welle, Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, and Professor Hans-Gert Pant, whose distinguished presence and scholarly contributions have added immense depth and diversity to our deliberations. Your perspectives and experiences have broadened our understanding of the geopolitical landscapes and the evolving security dynamics. We would like to acknowledge and appreciate the generous funding by the European Union and collaborative efforts of the partnering institution, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, St. Xavier's College, Ranchi, coordinated by Dr. Shreya Pandey, Atmaram Sanatan Dhan College, University of Delhi, coordinated by Dr. Prem Chand and supported by Dr. Amit Singh and Dr. Vikas Kumar, Satyavati College, University of Delhi, coordinated by Dr. Aditya Misra and supported by Dr. Stephen Ray, Sahid Bhagat Singh College, University of Delhi, coordinated by Rajiv Ranjan Sinha and Dr. Ritusha Tiwari. Our special appreciation and thanks to the faculty members and hundreds of students of these esteemed institutions who are participating through online mode. Your support has been instrumental in bringing together this distinguished panel and fostering intellectual dialogue. The students and faculties of ARST College are here with us, joined through physical mode. Many people are also watching these programs live streaming through SI's blog YouTube channel. We thank them for their interest and participation in this program. A special note of thanks to the diligent student volunteers Vinod, Abhishek, Namrata, Adarsh, Samir, Ansumai, Fatima, Arsia, Mrigank, and Sweta. Your enthusiasm and commitment have played a pivotal role in the smooth execution of this event. Last but not the least, our sincere appreciation to the dedicated center staff, Mahaviji and Ruchiji, for their behind-the-scenes efforts in ensuring the seamless coordination and organization of this panel discussion. In conclusion, the success of today's event is a testament to the collaborative spirit and shared commitment to intellectual discourse. We look forward to more such engaging discussions in future. I would like to thank the faculty members of Center for European Studies, faculties of School of International Studies, and thank you all for your invaluable contributions. And we express our deepest gratitude for making this event a memorable one. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. When was